In European history, the year 1848 has become synonymous with bloodshed and revolution. It was a year when food shortage, unemployment, and economic depression moved the middle class to rebel against the ruling class. Nowhere was this more plainly seen than in the country of France and its 1848 revolution. To get the French revolutionary ball rolling, let's take a look at Louis Philippe, France's king at the onset of this bloody year. To put it mildly, Louis Philippe was not a fan favorite of the French middle class, known collectively as the bourgeois. To them, Philippe was the epitome of a wealthy, out-of-touch king who cared only for the elite. The fact that much of the middle and common class lacked the right to vote only increased, if not proved, their opinion of the monarch. As the middle class strove for more rights, the aristocracy fought to hold their positions of power. However, by 1848, the bourgeois of France had endured. They were hungry for change. Unfortunately for the people of France, their hunger was not merely metaphorical. The years leading up to 1848 had seen horrible harvests, causing a food shortage and a devastating spike in food prices. As people began to physically go hungry, and as jobs evaporated, riots filled the streets of French cities. The middle class began calling for reform, demanding fair wage and work practices, as well as the end to inflationary pricing. However, their cries fell on deaf ears, and with each hungry mouth and each riot, political unrest grew. Revolution was in the air. As usually happens in times of political unrest, France's aristocracy worked to suppress rebellion by further limiting the rights of the disenfranchised. An excellent example of this occurred when the monarchy of Louis Philippe refused to allow a group of political dissenters to hold a banquet celebrating their revolutionary spirit. This could perhaps be labeled as one of the straws that broke the camel's back. In violence, the middle class took to arms, and King Louis Philippe was ousted from power. With this, the way was paved for the Second Republic of France. Unfortunately for the country, their problems were not solved by the ousting of their king. Soon new political factions began to form from the very bourgeois that had incited the rebellion. On one side were those who felt voting rights were the primary concern of the new government. On the other were those who believed economic reform was of utmost importance. This latter group, which favored economic reform, was led by Louis Blanc. Under his leadership, national workshops were established, which provided much-needed job opportunities. However, when those who were more committed to voting rights were elected to power, they closed the national workshops created by Blanc and his followers. This threw France into even more violence, as the angry workers took to the streets in violence, protesting the closing of their places of employment. Occurring in June, this bloodshed claimed thousands of French lives and has come to be known as June Days. Facing such chaos, the Second Republic of France chose to elect a president as a strong central leader. Although this move helped stem the bloody year of 1848, it saw France jump out of the frying pan and into the fire. Ironically, the man they elected was the infamous Napoleon Bonaparte, who within a few years would strip the French of their political rights and declare himself emperor. The year 1848 was full of bloodshed and revolution across Europe. This was especially true in the country of France, as the middle class, also known as the bourgeois, grew more and more intolerant of King Louis Philippe and his aristocratic cronies. When the monarchy refused to see to the needs of the common class and prohibited the revolutionary-minded middle class to convene for a banquet, tensions rose into revolution, and King Louis Philippe was ousted from power. Unfortunately for France, this was not the end to their woes. Upon ridding themselves of the king, the revolutionaries had different views on how to run the country. On one side of the argument were those who wanted to focus on voting rights. On the other were those who felt economic reform was of utmost importance. These economic reformers were led by Louis Blanc. Under his leadership, national workshops were established to provide job opportunities. When those who favored voting reform were elected to power, they closed the workshop of Blanc and his followers. Outraged by this, workers took to the streets in a bloody fight that killed thousands of French people. These horrific days have come to be known as June Days. With the country in chaos, a president was elected to gain control. Unfortunately for the French, they elected none other than the infamous Napoleon Bonaparte, a man who would strip the French of their political rights and declare himself emperor.